Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I think I have to pretty much congratulate all of you to, first of all, finding the room. I think it's one of the rooms that's probably all the way far out at the conference. So thank you for that. Next to that, I know it's pretty much lunchtime. So that's another challenge where I'm somehow in between spicing up your appetite for Azure certification and finding the balance between, do we need food or do we need to become certified, right? So I'll try to do my best. I don't have any demos. There's not a good reason for that, but it's mainly about helping you, giving you some guidance on, well, first of all, what's the whole new thing about the new certification. It's really new. I mean, even like for us as Microsoft trainers, we got most of the information just last week. So they really made them brand new for the conference. But on the other side, I was part of the team that somehow helped the preparation, so everything around how can we, as Microsoft and the Microsoft Learning Division, how can we make the certification more current in a way that it's really valid what you guys need to know in the field. If you're an administrator, like mainly topic I'll talk about today, if you're more like a developer, an architect, a lot of feedback overall from the previous certifications was that it was too broad, sometimes too hard, because it was really spanning the full Azure spectrum, which is still pretty broad. So one of the major changes there was focusing on a job role. So that's the first big change. And I'll just walk you through sharing my feedback. I'm almost a full-time trainer all over the globe, helping customers, partners, even Microsoft internal folks on becoming certified. And Azure is really my domain. You can read this afterwards. I started my career, if you want, pretty much 22 years ago, and somehow started doing training as of my second week. It was on mainframe and SAP, although I knew a little bit about Windows at that time. And then quickly jumped to NT4 server, did Exchange for quite a long time. And then 4 years ago, well, pretty much 5 years ago, somehow got tired of Exchange. There was something called Office 365, and I didn't really like it because it was killing my Exchange business. No, I'm just joking. But then I was like, I want to do something new. I want to find a new challenge in my IT career. And I moved to Azure, where I started with virtual machines, networking, all the infrastructure stuff. And again, pretty much doing training all over the world, almost full-time. So if you have any questions specifically on this exam, or any other one, or even technical, not specific to certification around Azure, then let me know. So what we're going to cover is, first of all, the introduction about the new certification. Again, it's really, really new. It's just announced on Monday, technically. And a lot of things are changing, or have already been changed in the meantime. So I'm going to start with that. And then specifically zooming in on the first exam for the Azure Administrator role, which is the AZ-100. Now, funny enough, depending a bit on from where you are, like in my case, I'm from Belgium. So when we say AZ, we think about easy. And then in some other Microsoft terminology, 100 means level 100, right? So one of the questions I got yesterday when I was working at the certification booth was, does it mean that the AZ-100 is really, really easy exam? And then the 200 is a bit more hard, and the 300 is super hard? I'm like, no, that's not how it works. And I'll walk you through some information there as well. The another one, how to prepare yourself. Where do you get started? Who has never done any Microsoft exam in the last 4 years? Or maybe never done a Microsoft exam? Let's start with that. Anyone? Okay, brave. Anyone in the last 4 years? Like the Windows 2012, maybe? Cool. Anyone currently studying for like the in-between Azure exams, the 532, 33, 35? Okay, good. I'll talk about it a little bit later on. Like, do we have to restudy everything? What's still valid? What's not valid anymore? And then ending the session with some of my personal tips and tricks, like stuff that I share in pretty much all my trainings. Like you saw the technology, you played with it, you're out the training or using like even the new Microsoft Learn video online platform. And then just sharing, and actually pretty much my personal view on how I prepare myself. Anyone failed any exams in the past? Yeah, I'm one of them. I fail a lot of exams. The reason is because I don't have time to study. And that's the main reason why you fail, because you're busy with a lot of stuff. You're working full-time, right? You need to take care of your family. You need to walk the dog. You need to sport. You need to do, I don't know, go to a bar and have fun with your friends. And on top of that, you need to study. So, and that's always somewhere at the back of your mind. And then all of a sudden, you need to become certified, and it's not working. So I'll share, that's one of my last slides at the end, where I'm going to share some of my guidance on how do I prepare myself to get certified. Quite important, another thing is, what is an exam prep session not? First of all, we're not going to show you live exam questions. So if you're hoping to get like 50 questions that we just go through each and every question during the next 75 minutes, we're not doing that. We're also not sharing where you can find brain dumps. Who has no idea what a brain dump is? You all know what it is, I know. It's one of the biggest mistakes in becoming certified or trying to become certified is going out to the internet and searching for, well, currently I hope not yet, but like the AZ-100 brain dumps. First of all, it's too new, so it's pretty hard to find brain dumps on an exam that just went live like 2 days ago. It's actually not 100% live, it's still in like a beta wave for the next couple of days, most probably. So we're not going to talk about that either. And if you have any questions, like, yeah, but why shouldn't we use brain dumps? Easy said, for now, don't use them. You're just fooling yourself. Because what you do with certification is proving, first of all, to yourself that you know your stuff, right? And then you prove it to your manager, maybe to your colleagues, like, I know this thing. Where if you go out and you search for those brain dumps, maybe theoretically, it might be doable to pass the exam. Where, I don't know, in this one, we're going to talk about virtual machines, networking, some identity stuff. And then since you're the only guy in your company who's certified, you pass the exam here at Ignite. And then next week, your manager sends you to a customer where you need to deploy high available virtual machine setup with 400 servers. You don't want to be that guy. But you still got your paper, right? So that's another reason why, obviously, we're not talking about brain dumps. And lastly, it's no guarantee for passing the exam. Why? Because 75 minutes, it's too short. And you still need practice. That's, again, another piece of advice already at the beginning of the session. You need to know your stuff, and I'll talk about it later on. Now, starting with the new certification. So again, if you look at the former Azure exams, 533 implementing Azure solutions, 532 developing, and 534, and then switched to 5 earlier this year, the architecting one, was mainly about how do you understand the platform, where the implementing was mainly show us that you're capable of deploying resources, virtual machines, platform service, pretty much everything. The development one was mainly focusing on using platform services and a bit less on infrastructure because you're like a developer, not really building VMs, networking, all that stuff. And architecting was you need to know everything in the platform, all the building blocks, and knowing how they somehow relate with each other, which was pretty hard, honestly. So what Microsoft Learning did is really starting back to the basics. Like if you're an Azure admin, which is, again, the main topic of this certification, what is the stuff that you need to know? And we did a lot of workshop sessions in Redmond where trainers and Microsoft Learning folks were brainstorming about what is the typical day-to-day Azure admin role. What is the stuff that a typical Azure admin is working with on a day in, day out basis? If you're running like virtual machines infrastructure, you probably need to manage networking, VM deployment, VM management, backup, site recovery, all those things. Where if you're a developer, maybe you don't really need to know all that stuff on how to deploy virtual machines because you're mainly working with web apps. You're maybe working with database as a service and a lot of other components. So that's the first switch from like compared to the former examination. So for now, there are 4 different roles. So the first one, Azure Admin. I think it's typically, at least that's my view, if you're like the IT pro sysadmin today, and your organization is somehow using Azure in a hybrid way or using full cloud, then that would probably be the target exam for you. Obviously, if you're a developer, then you're going to use the developer one, the architect one, and a new one, which didn't exist in the old terminology, the Azure DevOps Engineer. So the next thing is, where do I get started? What are the different certifications? You already know that there are a couple of new ones. So you can start with, anyone familiar with the former MCSA, well, former, it's still active now, MCSA, MCSE, or a couple of years back, MCITP, and then they switched back to MCSA, MCSE. Yeah, so this is pretty similar. So we're still talking about fundamentals. That's really like your entry. I see it more for if you're totally new to IT, and specifically totally new to Azure, but not even having any huge understanding of how to deploy servers, networking, all that stuff, then you start with fundamentals. But it's an optional step. So it's not that if you want to become certified in the new wave of Azure, that you need to start with fundamentals. So just know that that step is there, but it's not a valid starting point for all of you, depending a bit on your experience. So the next level is the associate, where again, for the administrator one, you become an Azure Administrator Associate. Who wants to become an Azure Administrator Associate? Yeah, welcome to the AAA club then. And then you move on with the expert level. So it's still MCSA, MCSE alike, but it's just split up in a couple of different ways. And then quite important, so again, this one is AZ-100. Tomorrow I'm doing a similar session on the AZ-101, where 30% of the talk, like again, introduction on certification, is similar, but then drilling down on those are the specific topics you need to know for that exam. Now, if you're already past the 532, 33, 35, then you can also go through a transition exam. So it's not an upgrade, it's a transition. Now, what's important about a transition, and in the admin terms would be the 102. It's valid, so first of all, you need to have the 533 certification, and then you can transition to the 102. Now, the transition fact is that you're going to be tested specifically on everything that was not covered in the 533. So you already passed the 533, I don't know, last week, 2 years ago, not that important, and you're going to be tested on all the stuff that's new since that 533 time frame. That's how you have to look at it. So it's not an upgrade like they used to offer in like Server 12, and then you move up to Server 16 or Exchange or whatever technology. So this is really a transitioning phase. Make sense? Good. So specific on your Azure admin role. I mean, it's easy to have an Azure admin certification, but what does Microsoft Learning think of an Azure administrator? So I'm going to try to read out the official definition. I mean, it's not super important, but nevertheless, it's actually pretty important because it already maps with the different Azure resources that you somehow need to manage. So it starts with spanning storage security, networking, compute, cloud capabilities. So that's like infrastructure, right? And then you move on with having a deep understanding of the full IT lifecycle. So it's not just about deploying, it's about managing, it's about updating. And understanding infrastructure services, but also applications. So it's not just a virtual machine infrastructure, if you want. It's also applications. How do you run websites? How do you run the web apps part? But not from the developer perspective. So you need to find some balance. Like, I'm an admin, and what's like the tipping point before I become a developer? Do I need to be able to deploy a web app, but maybe not knowing how to integrate, I don't know, any security aspect, or how to really rebuild your web app coding, because then specifically you're a developer. But you need to know logging. You need to know the monitoring part of it. Although it's a platform service, but it would be valid for your admin task. And then moving on, where next to like the day-to-day management, you also need to be able to recommend services for performance, scaling, and obviously I'm focusing on the job role to somehow allow you to think about what are the different Azure services that I need to master. If you think about performance and scale, the answer is, for the ones who know Azure already, what is the Azure service that gives you performance and scale? Anyone? If you don't know that, you're not ready for the exam yet? Scale sets in virtual machines, auto-scaling, yep. So that's how you have to think about, that's my role, and that's the Azure service that I need to understand. And again, if you don't make that reflection or correlation, it's easy, you're not ready for the exam yet. I don't want to scare you guys away, just to be sure, but that's how you have to think about it, right? And then the typical audience, which is another part, is besides all the specific Azure stuff, you need to have some proficiency on using PowerShell, on using command line, which immediately tells you if you're sitting down for taking the exam, and the only thing you've been using so far is the portal, you're not going to make it. Is it 50% PowerShell, 30% CLI, and 20% portal? I don't know. It's a mix. Some questions might be a PowerShell script where they remove some keywords, and you need to drag and drop them in the correct order, and making sure that like the PowerShell script is running. So it's not just a portal. It's not 100% CLI either, so it's really a combination of multiple ones. And next to that, having obviously a basic understanding of Azure Portal, ARM templates, operating systems, because if you need to deploy an Azure virtual machine, it's a little bit different in capability than a Windows machine compared to a Linux machine, so you need to have some operating system knowledge as well. Understanding virtualization, that's more towards like the hybrids, how do you move stuff into Azure. Overall cloud infrastructure, storage, and networking, which are obviously the main building blocks if you're like an admin. I'm gonna try to zoom in on this one a little bit. Obviously, you can download the slide deck later on. If you want, we also have some flashcards at the certification booth, so down at the expo hall all the way to the right, where we got these nice flashcards with the exact same information on there. If you want to take it home to your colleagues whatsoever, then you can do that. So a quick walkthrough of the core building blocks for the AZ-100, so everything on top. It starts with managing subscriptions. Maybe today in your day-to-day job, you're not responsible for managing subscriptions. Why? Because in a lot of organizations, it's the CEO, the CTO who's managing that. Where now all of a sudden, you need to understand different subscriptions. How can I migrate, move resources between subscriptions? How can I lock down capabilities? How can I integrate policies? That would be like, again, the technical features. And then pretty similar to how you build your data center, you start with underlying storage. Understanding the different storage capabilities, and pretty deep understanding deploying and managing virtual machines. So how to deploy them using ARM templates, for example, using a PowerShell script, using CLI, in a couple of different ways, where they might even show you like an ARM template where you need to, again, add some stuff, although you don't really need to start typing or authoring an ARM template. But they can use a lot of different ways, like showing you a template and asking you like, what's the template doing? If it's virtual machines, networking, clustering, scale sets, all that stuff. And then networking is another pretty important one. And the last topic for the AZ-100 is managing identities, which means in Azure terms, Azure Active Directory. Good. So you go to all those resources, you take the exam AZ-100, then you do the same for the AZ-101, and I'll talk about that in a session tomorrow, and then you become an Azure Administrator Associate. So it's 2 exams for 1 certification. It's pretty easy. I mean, just 2 exams, right? And then you become an MC, AAA if you want. Still good? Not too hard? Not too boring yet? Okay, good. So the next thing is, What has changed in the overall Microsoft exam world? I mean, again, this is not specifically towards the AZ-100, but overall, I mean, it's not really changed that dramatically. So overall, any exam is between 40 and 60 questions. Might be that you take the exam, you got 40 questions, and that your colleague at the exact same day in the exact same training center or from home, depending where you live, that person got 60 questions. Why? I don't know. It's dynamically generated. And another thing, by the way, if you take the exam, so one of the first couple of questions is, like, what is your experience? Where they go, like, how would you quantify your experience with Azure networking? Where you can go, I'm like a beginner, a medium, I'm an expert. Where some folks think that if you make it basic, that your exam becomes super easy. But it doesn't work like that. It's just getting some information back to Microsoft, like when do people actually take an exam? Already at the beginning of their experience level, or do they wait all the way till they're actually the full expert level and then just taking the exam? So don't think that answering any of those questions make your exam harder or easier. Time-wise, it's about 180 minutes, where from the technical question perspective, it's roughly 150 minutes, where you can go to all the questions, and you can go through each and every question, flagging them like, I don't know the answer, I'm going to come back at the end. That's how it works. A lot more than multiple choice. Multiple choice is easy. You got a question, like a scenario, got a question, and any of the following is the correct one. Is it A, B, C, whatever? Could be from A to G, like giving you, I don't know, 7, 8, 15 different options where you need to choose from. Where the other advice I can share is make sure that you read the question. I know it sounds easy, right? I mean, yeah, we need to read the question. But in a lot of scenarios, people fail because they miss that they need to provide 2 answers, or 3 or 5 or whatever. And if the question asks you for 3 and you only give 2, or you give 4, then obviously the question is wrong. I know it sounds, again, pretty silly, but it's actually a big reason why people fail, because they just miss that one part in the question. And then the other one is integrating with a case study. So what is a case study? It's, first of all, a couple of multiple screens that you need to read. And for each and every topic, it's a business interaction and a technical interaction, where they just not only challenge you on do you actually know how to manage things, how to deploy things, but also understanding, like in a broader spectrum. Like they give you a scenario where, I don't know, just thinking from the top of my mind here, you need to build a high available website across multiple regions. That would be the scenario. But then next to that, from a business perspective, they go like, the monthly budget we have is X amount of money. Where you start thinking about, okay, for the first part of the question, I can use scale sets. But the next part is maybe not the full scale sets, because you don't know what the behavior of the website is, and it might go up and down, or it might all go up, 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 which means that it becomes more expensive. So that's really like not just how to implement a website or a web app and understanding scale sets, but really finding like a bit more complicated question, if you want. Where the tricky part is, besides that it's a bit harder, that you cannot go back to the case study. So you start a case study, you got like 5, maybe 8 questions specifically oriented around that case study. You move to the next part and you cannot go back to the case study. So that's a little bit different than the overall other 40 questions that you get. Then another big question mark is scoring. It's 700, easy. Any exam, not just the Azure ones, the 365, M365 later on if you want. It's 700. Where 700, for some reason, doesn't mean I got 70%. In the end, it's not that important. Just know that you need to get 700 to pass the exam. But you don't know if any question, a short question might give you, I don't know, 20 points, and a super long question might give you 50 points, or the other way around. We don't know. It's the Microsoft exam intelligence in the backend that's running, where they decide based on complexity and so on, what your points will be. It's not becoming easier or harder throughout the exam, which is another huge misconception. So you think like, okay, this sounds easy, next question, easier, 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 and all of a sudden it becomes harder. The question or the pool of questions is allocated once you start the exam. So even if you think by yourself like, this seems to be hard and I'm failing a couple of questions here, then just go on. I mean, first of all, don't stop your exam. You never know that you can still pass, like going up to the 700. But it's not that it's going to change throughout the exam itself. So there's no dynamic testing if you want. A couple of different exam types. So it might be a technical one, although the developer one doesn't really fit in the admin one. Can be a problem statement where, like the example I used, you need to build some high available, scalable solution, or literally this is what you need to achieve, where you need to define the solution as, I don't know, VNet peering whatsoever, or asking you, this is a scenario, and that's the achievement that you need to get. Like, how would you enable Azure backup, where you need to provide a, I don't know, a monthly backup, a yearly backup, those things. That's the introduction. Not specific on the AZ-100. So from now I'm going to try to make it a little bit more technical and sharing some tips and tricks. Now first of all is, what are the different Azure building blocks, the Azure resources that I need to know for that specific exam? Because you already know that it's not the broad Azure landscape anymore, it's really based on your job role. So for this one, the AZ-100, it starts again with managing subscriptions. So depending a bit on your experience, your internal organization, it might be that you have a single subscription in which you're deploying dev and test environments, in which you're running production environments, virtual machines, networking, everything. Or it might be that your organization is a bit larger and you got 50 subscriptions to manage. So it might be super easy, or it might become a bit hard, depending on, again, your environment and your experience. And then we're going to drill down on literally building like a, I would say, a basic data center, where you start with storage, then we move on with virtual machines, networking, and ending with identity. Where for each and every of the core, what Microsoft Learning calls objective domains, they give you a certain ranking. Now, funny enough, if you start calculating, it's or 80% or it's 120%. So it's somewhere in the middle. So what it means, easy said, if you got 5 objective domains, and you know that you got roughly 40 to 60 questions, it's about 8 questions per topic. Could be 10, and then maybe 6 on another topic. Could be 12 and 4, so it's a little bit dynamic. Sounds good? Okay. So a pretty important question, because I mean the world doesn't stop because Microsoft starts firing off new Azure exams, right? So what if you already studied for the 533? What do you think? Forget everything and start all over? Sorry? I mean, it's the same Azure environment. So quite important is, first of all, you're not losing anything. If you started learning on the 533, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, you can reuse all that information. It might even become a bit easier because a lot of stuff that you learned for the 533 is not coming back in the AZ-100. Obviously, it will show up in the AZ-101 because, again, it's still overall that same platform. I'm not going to drill down in all the details like this is the old school, this is the new thing. But overall, one of the highlights that was important in the 533 was ARM templates. It was really focused on ARM templates, where they now somehow flipped it over to implementing managing, which, by the way, still means you need to know ARM templates. But they're not explicitly telling it anymore. Why not? Because you got PowerShell and CLI and the portal on top of that. So it looks that it's easier, but it becomes a little bit harder. But again, key message here is that you didn't lose anything. Reuse all the knowledge, your experiences that you already have, and just move on with the new certification. Another question that came up yesterday at the booth is, yeah, but I got my 533 scheduled for next week, Tuesday. Is it still worthwhile to take it? The answer there is yes. Why? Because you already know there's a transition exam. So if you take the 533, let's say for that one guy next week, Tuesday, the next step would be taking the 102, transitioning, and becoming full certified again. So in whatever way you're like in between learning or you already passed it, then you can take the transition one. So if you already passed the 533, you don't need to go through the 100 and 101. Then you take the 102 and then your certification is current again. That's what it means. So the objective domains. So what we're going to do here is for each and every of those 5, drilling down where for your personal reflection, when you're like sitting in the session or you walk out and you go like, this session was so boring because I already knew all that stuff. That means you're ready for taking the exam. So don't look at it as being a boring session. It means, yes, I'm ready for passing that exam. And I'm not joking. I mean, again, if you're here to go like, oh, subscriptions are so easy. Resource management is so easy. I understand ARM templates. I know how to use CLI, PowerShell to deploy stuff. Then I think you're pretty comfortable in passing that exam. And again, there's no guarantee, obviously. But if on whatever point I talk about cost management, Azure policies, and you go like, what the hell is he talking about? I never heard something about Azure policies. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee for failing, because again, it's only like 15% of the whole exam. But if you go out like, seems like there's a lot more in Azure that I didn't know about, then you're not ready to like go down and take the exam in the afternoon. So that's how you have to look at it. So again, the core objectives, an Azure subscription. And obviously, I'm not going to read out each and every line. But in Azure services, Azure building blocks, if you want, it starts with role-based access control. Who has never heard of role-based access control? And no, I'm not going to ask that for each and every of the red bullets, but you all know what role-based access control is? Good. Policies is another one. What's the main difference between role-based access control and policies? Just trying to keep you guys awake, that's all. Anyone? Policies cover a lot more than access control. It's a good start. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, good approach, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, obviously I'm not allowed to expose any real questions, but role-based access control points to, like you want to lock down admin capabilities. If you're, let's say, a network guy today, then in an Azure world where you by default pretty much get access to everything if you're not using role-based access control, then you can use RBAC to lock down that one user credential when he or she logs on to the portal, CLI, whatever way, that the only thing they can manage is networking and not even seeing everything else. By the way, a funny story, I had a customer a couple of months ago, and I was talking about Azure Platform Services, web apps, databases, all that stuff. And the guy said, like, it's not showing up in my subscription. I don't have it. I didn't even know it was there. Because what like the CTO did in their environment is locking down everything that was not virtual machine storage and networking. So when that admin guy logged onto the Azure portal, the only thing he could manage was virtual machines, networking, and storage. So he had no clue about Azure Functions, Service Bus, and all the other cool stuff in the platform. So don't get fooled there. There's a lot more in Azure than what you might see. Another important one is tagging and cost management. What's the tool to use cost management? Yep. So for now, Cloud In, and it might change in like becoming an integrated solution there. And again, I mean, you could think about a question again. It's just inventing a question here real time. But one question could be for now, like, what would be the component in Azure to get a view on your virtual machine consumption cost? Is it a pricing calculator? Is it Cloud In for now? Or is it option D, E, and F? Something like that. Where again, if you never worried about cost management because it's not your concern, it's your manager or whoever in the organization, then you might not know that answer. Or you go like, oh yeah, it's a pricing calculator. But that's like before deploying stuff, right? It's not when it's actually already deployed. So that's how you have to think about it. Obviously, another big one is monitoring and diagnostics. That's a hard one. It sounds easy, 2 keywords, monitoring, diagnostics. But again, think about it. It's everywhere in the platform. If you deploy a virtual machine, you got virtual machine diagnostics. But next to that, you got log analytics, that big beast of a logging station that collects all information from everywhere. And then you need to use the query language and finding all the resources and stuff. So it sounds easy, but can be a complicated one. And another one is moving resources. What's most important there is knowing what can be moved and what cannot be moved. But again, if you're running in a single subscription environment today, you don't care because you never move resources, right? That's your island. Where if you got multiple environments moving from a test and dev and you need to move resources, and then all of a sudden finding out that certain resources cannot be moved or can be moved under certain conditions where, like the Azure identity is pretty much the most important one. So some guidelines, where do you start? It's starting with the basics, looking at the Azure world, the Azure environment, where hopefully you all know that it starts with a subscription. Any subscription type, I don't care. It's about a trial version, enterprise agreement if you're a super large environment. That's a little bit of like cost mapping towards Microsoft. And then you build out your subscriptions. And then on the left-hand side, you start with locking down capabilities. Who can do what? My admin person can only manage virtual machines networking, and that's it. Or we're going to make sure that our admins can only deploy that specific virtual machine type. Not the super expensive D64, but only like the DS2 V2, for example. To just make sure that it's, instead of like 5,000 a month, it's only like 200 a month, something like that. Another one is naming standards. Think about, again, one of the examples I shared where they present you a PowerShell script where they're going to deploy a storage account and you're using capitals. What's the result? It's not going to run. And that's where, again, it comes back to your practical experience. If you read any of that information, you go like, why, it's just a name for a storage account. Capitals, low level, I don't care. Where once you start deploying it and you find out that it's actually using capitals, then you get an error message. And obviously everything around it. Resource tagging, one of the features I didn't cover yet. The basics of a resource group are back. Again, it's all coming back. So that's like the real high level view of your Azure world, your Azure environment. And again, you're managing this, you're administrating this. Think about all the cool questions we can ask you guys. With some examples, but not going to spend too much time on that part. So know that important aspect about role-based access control is that you can customize them. So you got, I don't know, by heart, 75 pre-configured roles, but you can customize them. How do you customize them? Anyone ever tried it out? What do you need? JSON, PowerShell, yep. It doesn't work in the portal. Keep that in mind. Another one is on the multi-subscriptions, managed groups, resource groups. Who has never heard about managed groups? Something still pretty new, like I think it introduced about 2 months ago. What's that? Okay, but who's watching the keynote, right? No, I'm just joking. So management groups obviously is an important one where you can do some cool things, and again, from an exam perspective, it's becoming an important one. So the next one is resource management, where for some reason title's gone, but there it is. That's what I already talked about. It's that huge big bucket of monitoring, log analytics, management, diagnostics, everything. So it starts with individual diagnostic settings, where you go to a virtual machine, you got, so all the way down in the portal, You got your diagnostic settings that's somehow pretty similar if you go to web apps, SQL databases, and other resources. Knowing the integration between getting alerts and notifications, like what are the Azure services to make sure that when a CPU spikes to 90% that you get an alert of that. Where they give you like option 1 would be this, option 2 would be that. That's, for example, another type of question. Again, multi-subscription base. So analyzing alerts across subscriptions because it's a little bit harder to configure. Configuring action groups. What's an action group? A group to do an action? No. Something, again, pretty new. And I'm just highlighting some of the topics that are becoming more important. And again, like if you started studying for the 533, then at that moment in time, action groups didn't exist, managed groups didn't exist. And that's, again, why they have like a transition exam. So, nice. So you need to know how to configure the diagnostics, how to get notifications, how to get alerts, and also, again, all integration with metrics. If my CPU spikes to 90%, if my memory consumption go up, can I monitor network bandwidth in ExpressRoute, things like that, yes or no, and yes in this way, no in that way. So that could be like the question types. Resource utilization and cost, we already talked about like the former, or I would say current Cloudin, where it's becoming integrated in the portal, where you need to understand what does those numbers mean. If it tells me that your average spend is like 5,000 a month, then you need to know where it comes from. Another one is the egress-ingress network traffic, where a question might be like, what do you pay for? Do you pay for all traffic in and out? Do you pay for traffic in, traffic out? It's free because we're Microsoft and we give you free networking stuff. So that's how you have to think about it. Or how to understand reports on spend. Where in the portal do you go to find that information? Where they might give you like a screenshot like this one, and you need to select any of those areas. Like if you want a detail on, I don't know, billing accounts, then obviously you go to that one. If you need, I don't know, you want to go back to an invoice from last year, then you go to the invoices topic, and then you don't find it because it's not keeping track of that for more than a year. See? So that's what it's not a tricky question. It's again just knowing, like, is the capability there, yes or no? Another one about the action groups. So again, another pretty new feature, where the action group is somehow defining an action type. Do you want a notification by email, text message, integration with Slack? Then you would need logic apps. So it's a combination with different Azure resources. Integrating with your ITSM solution, so your service management tool, where ServiceNow is one, just not doing any marketing for them, just one of the projects I worked with, where maybe your current ITSM solution is not supported. And obviously, it might become a question like, which ones are supported, which not? Hey, how would I find out? What's your main resource for studying, by the way? Besides the cool Microsoft Learn, the new 80 hours of online videos? Yay, docs.microsoft.com. It's your prime resource of knowledge. And I'm joking a little bit about it, but honestly, it's your prime resource. It's a huge task, obviously, to keep all that information current, but it's also a huge objective from each and every Azure product group to make sure that the information is current. And when the backend team is building like Microsoft training, the mock material, official courseware, it's always based on what's the official documentation highlighting. It's not based on my experience, not based on experience from another trainer. It's based on what the product group is sharing as official documentation. So read that information. In there, obviously I don't know by heart, but there's one page that tells you these are the, for now, supported ITSM solutions. Might become an exam question, I don't know. But again, some examples, well, you start with the action group, next you define a name, you allocate your subscription, and you're going to define the actions. So this could be like a, I don't know, how-to question, where they give you 4 different keywords where you need to drag them in the correct order. Where the question could be, you need to define an action group to make sure that we receive an email notification. You got 4 different actions, and you need to drag them in the correct order, like literally how you would go through the portal. Resource management, most important there is understanding the overall Azure AD tenant, which from an identity perspective becomes your baseline. Like moving stuff between different resource groups, that's fine, but moving between multiple subscriptions, some of them don't work if they're not linked to the same Azure AD tenant. If it's not working or like not using the same Azure AD tenant, then we're not talking about a move, we're talking about a transfer. What's the difference? In most scenarios, there's downtime involved. Where if you just move resources, there's a lot of stuff happening in the backend. If you transfer, it's not always online. Still good? Good? Learning something? Yeah? Okay. Another important one is understanding and recognizing limitations. How many CPUs you can run in a single subscription, how many network objects you can run, how many VPN gateways you can deploy, where they might give you a scenario you need to deploy 500 VPN gateways. In a single subscription, it's not possible. And again, that's relying on the documentation. Most probably, you cannot really test it out unless you tell me that you're working for such a large environment where you actually need to deploy 500 VPN gateways, then I'll be interested to help you out. So it's about what's possible, what's not possible, what can be moved, what cannot be moved unless using a sideway, and important some limitations. And again, don't learn all those numbers by heart, but most of them somehow make sense. Another one is, what is the stuff, the Azure resources that cannot be moved? It's just, again, some guideline from my own experience. Why would you remember that you can manage or move, I don't know, 50,000 Azure resources? But no, it's more important to know like those, I don't know, 20-something, a bit more, that cannot be moved. Because most probably the question is, you got an Azure database, and you need to move it across subscriptions. It's easier to understand or to remember that those 40-something cannot be moved. It's a lot easier than learning that 5,000 can actually be moved, right? So it's just looking at it from the opposite perspective. So a lot of details just about that one, management, resources, and diagnostics. So we're moving on. Storage, obviously an important one. Again, this exam mainly focuses on like building, managing your Azure infrastructure, where obviously it's pretty hard to deploy VMs if you don't have any storage underneath. So again, using just the red building blocks, understanding storage accounts. What are storage accounts? What are the capabilities? What's the difference between page blobs, block blobs, those things? What's the difference between premium storage, managed disks, unmanaged disks? What's the other important one? Security. How do you connect to your storage account? Do you give admin rights? Do you use Azure AD integration? Do you use shared access keys, which would be like the correct answer there? How do you migrate data, import, extract data to Azure? Where a key component in, again, the new certification is CDN. There were no questions on 533 about CDN. In the new one, it's a pretty important topic. Azure Files, another interesting service, still pretty new. Not a lot of customers are already using it, but it's a pretty important topic for your exam. How to deploy Azure Files, what are the capabilities, building your hybrid scenario, like running an on-prem file server, synchronizing files to Azure File Sync, how you implement it, what are the different steps, how do you monitor a diagnostic, and that's how it all comes back together. And then the last one here is Azure Backup. What is Azure Backup? Again, how do you implement it? How can you use Azure Backup? What are the different flavors? And so on. So again, drilling down on some of those topics. So first of all, understanding the different services. So when you deploy an Azure storage account, you have blobs, files, tables, and queues, where some of them have certain characteristics, some of them can be used for a lot of stuff. What kind of storage type are you using for virtual machines? I know it's a silly question, but would it be blobs, files, tables, and queues? Yep, blobs. What if you want to store PDF documents? Who says blobs? Who says files? Okay, my answer is it depends. You need to have a little bit more information about like the specific case on how do you want to store PDFs. Is it out of an application? Then it would probably be blobs. If it's just storing files, then files could be valid. Or it could be like you need to present PDF documents, but we're not allowing SMB on the network. Then you know that files is not going to work because it relies on SMB file shares. So, security, understanding the difference between storage access keys and shared access signatures. It might be the same in output, but the configuration is different. The way you use it is totally different. Understanding replication, 4 different replication types. LRS, ZRS, read access. All sounds familiar? Yeah? Or getting a little bit awkward now? Huh? Could be, I don't know. It all, again, depends on your experiences already. Different scenarios for storage, like again, the blobs, files, tables. Difference between the general one and the V2. And the V2 is the newest one, is probably not a valid answer. There are certain differences between the traditional one and the V2. So when you're studying, when you're practicing building your stuff, focus on the differences between the traditional and the V2. Nice. Moving data around, using storage accounts, using managed disks, using storage steering, which is another topic. Know how to deploy virtual machines from a custom VHD file. How do you get that VHD file in Azure? What's the prime tool you're going to use? How do you copy a VHD file in Azure? AZ copy, there's one. What's the other one? Storage Explorer, yep. A valid tool that's been in preview for 8 years. So now it's an official one, so that's why it comes up here. And another important one, it's not just VHD files, because again, the overall topic is understanding, knowing how to import, extract data, where data can be databases. It doesn't mean that you need to be a super expert on like SQL Server or MySQL, but you need to know how to move your database. How do you move an Azure? No, how do you move a SQL database? Database Migration Assistant could be one, yeah. Migration services, or just using the SQL Management Studio, or command line or whatever. Bottom line message that, again, depends a little bit, but the Storage Explorer is probably not the best tool for migrating, although it could work. Like just taking your database offline, copying the MDB file, what's the other one? LDF file, MDF and LDF. So copying those files into some virtual machine in Azure, or moving to Azure SQL database services. Then obviously you're not going to use the AZ copy or the Storage Account Explorer, but using like a true migration tool. So that's again how you really have to think about the potential questions. And then CDN, again, is another one where for now it's important understanding, first of all, what it does. Why would you use CDN? What are the capabilities, characteristics, and how do you deploy it? You start with building a profile. Then you're going to define your CDN endpoint. You wait. And depending a bit on your scenario, like what provider are they using, it might take some time. And again, reflecting this with another sample question. Your organization is running a super critical, I don't know, business workload, and you need to guarantee that your data environment is up and running in less than 15 minutes. What CDN provider would you use? Where it could be like Microsoft or Akamai, where, I don't know, for this one, just again, inventing a question top of my mind, but it's probably Microsoft or maybe Akamai, depending on costs and capabilities whatsoever. So it all sounds, again, a lot of like theoretical approach, but it's really about understanding the core capabilities of the platform. So Azure Files, Azure File Sync, already talked about it. It's again knowing how to deploy it, what's possible, what's not possible, what's supported, where in the hybrid file sync scenario, the critical one is that it's not supporting Server 2008. It's not supporting Linux. So it's 2012 or 2016. Most probably the next couple of weeks, 19 will be supported as well, obviously. But then focusing on what is not supported, like NTFS, sysprep-based environments are not supported. Integration again with like Azure Backup Vault, because you start copying data to Azure file shares, and how do you take a backup of that? Are you again going to use AZ copy from one storage account to the other? Are you going to use another file share and then syncing file shares to another file share? No, because that doesn't work. And that's again how you have to really understand like what are the capabilities and what's possible, what's now working. Azure Backup, another easy keyword, but a pretty complicated tool if you want, although it's, I think, pretty easy to deploy it. Where, again, reflecting with a potential question is, if you need to back up a full on-prem running virtual machine that's running, I don't know, Exchange, SQL, whatever workload, then know that you don't just use the Azure agent, because that one's only supporting files and folders, but you need to deploy the full Azure Backup Server or like the Data Protection Manager, and then adding that cloud integration on top of that. So it's again a pretty easy question. You need to make sure that your on-prem virtual machines, 20 of them, not that important, can be backed up in Azure. And then knowing that it's agent, the backup server, or if it's an Azure virtual machine, Azure virtual machine backup. So what mechanism do you use if you want to backup files and folders inside an Azure VM? Azure Backup what? Agent. Yep. That was an easy question, right? So the next one, virtual machines. In my opinion, the easiest one, because that's like what most customers are using in Azure, right? It's building the virtual machine. So you have your storage environment with all the different capabilities, dependencies, and we're going to focus on the virtual machines, where obviously 25% of your exam, that's like a huge part of your exam is oriented around virtual machines. So what's important there? Super easy, everything. No virtual machines end-to-end. How to deploy them, what are the capabilities, what's working, what's not working, which operating systems are supported. So those are like the key domains. Besides that, how do you deploy them? How do you deploy a virtual machine using a PowerShell script? And don't again try to like memorize each and every PowerShell script, but at least understanding like those are the key PowerShell commandlets that allow me to deploy it, or knowing that a resource group and a location are like a hard-coded requirement. If you want to deploy a VM and you don't specify the resource group or location, it's not getting deployed, things like that. Again, you can read about it, but just play with it, learn it. Everything around ARM template deployment. Where the thing is, again, don't try to become the best ARM template author, as they call it, but understand like an ARM template is based on JSON. There's a certain structure in an ARM template where you define your parameters, variables. What's the other one? And the last one? Yep, good. PowerShell, DSC, virtual machine extensions, running scripts, integration with Chef, Puppet, those things. Where again, you don't need to become an expert on Chef or Puppet, but you need to know that you can make your virtual machine deployment smarter, more intelligent, more fine-tuned, like real flagging configuration settings, by using any of those virtual machine extensions. where, I don't know, another sample question again from top of my mind. If you need to deploy or provide like an automated way to deploy a virtual machine, Linux machine running as an Apache web server, would you use PowerShell DSC? Would you use extensions? Would you use Chef, Puppet, whatsoever? Marketplace. Yep, that's a fifth option actually for the web server. Azure is so complicated, right? But again, that's how you have to like understand. What's the difference between running a PowerShell script out of an extension or using DSC? What's the main difference? But they're both doing automation. Yep, so DSC goes through your configuration like every, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, where if you run that script, it runs once and it's done. Where the DSC, you know that if you need to deploy that web server and somebody logs onto the machine, removes some service components, that like 15 minutes after, the DSC script kicks in again and it's going to redeploy all the missing components. So that could be like another, where the question could be like, how would you guarantee that configuration setting? Where you can choose between DSC, PowerShell script, manual operation, or using, I don't know, probably there's always one answer that doesn't make any sense in there. Backups, we already talked about it, where this one is specifically on virtual machines and focusing on the different backup policies. Like if you want to backup every hour, every day, every week, every month, and so on, knowing how to configure it, knowing that one virtual machine can only have one backup policy. So you cannot define a policy and taking multiple backups of the same virtual machine. And obviously, most important, it's cross-platform. So if you're a Windows expert today, or a Linux expert, know that the questions are cross-operating system. So it might be if you don't know a lot about Linux today, that you might need to spice up your Linux knowledge a little bit. Where if you want to fire off an admin command within your virtual machine, that there's something called sudo, and that without sudo, it's not doing a lot, right? So, where it even might give you like option A is run this certain command, and option 2 is like the same but sudo, and the third one is with, I don't know, kudo, whatever. So that could be another one. What's kudo again? It was just came up with it, but I don't know. So configuration, diagnostics is another one. The deployment already talked about, like some hard-coded requirements, resource groups, location, those things. Specifying auto-scaling is another important one. How would you make sure that your application keeps up and running no matter how many users are connecting to your application? Then auto-scaling would be like the answer there, and a lot more than that. And then deployment, just going to do a quick time check. Good. Deployment, automation. Again, a pretty easy keyword, but so hard, so complicated to somehow get a practice on that one. So deploying Azure virtual machines in 5 different ways. Using the marketplace is the first option. If you find a SQL VM, fine, go ahead and deploy it. If you deploy like a full high available SharePoint environment, there's an image in the marketplace that spins up, I don't know by heart, 9 servers, I think, and creating a full high available SharePoint 2016 environment. Or using PowerShell, we already talked about it, using CLI, knowing that you might need to install a tool before you can actually use CLI on your management station, or using the Cloud Shell, where you can decide between Bash and PowerShell. Not running Python, but Bash and PowerShell. So was not a question that came up. ARM templates, again, pretty important. Understanding the structure, not becoming the expert on like an ARM template, but really knowing like how do you build one, how do you read one, and maybe adding some keywords to it might be another one. So the marketplace, PowerShell, ARM template structure, where a typical question there, a potential question there could be, again, like giving you a snippet of a JSON file and where you need to define, like, this is the 5 lines of code that deploys the virtual network. Or this is the 2 lines in the JSON file that will, I don't know, that deploy 50 VMs, something like that. So it's not where they're going to give you, like, hey, you need to build a JSON file from scratch and we're going to score you on that one. That's not going to happen. Although, by the way, one of the things I didn't talk about yet is something really, really new for the AZ-100 and the 101 is performance-based testing. So what's performance-based testing? Throughout the exam, so in your 150 minutes, you get access to a live Azure subscription. And you need to deploy stuff, or you need to do stuff. So it's one of the first exams ever in like the Microsoft world where you're actually going to deploy something throughout the exam. It can be anything. Like you need to deploy a virtual machine, high available web server cluster running IIS. Go ahead and do it. If you want to use a portal, fine. If you want to use PowerShell, if you want to use an ARM template, go ahead. And you need to build it. So it's not just, again, the theoretical multiple choice in a couple of different angles, but really executing something. On the 300 exam, obviously I'm not talking a lot about it, but it's a little bit different. So in there, you get access to a read-only Azure environment where resources are already deployed, and you need to answer questions out of that environment that you get. Like virtual machine 1 and 5 cannot communicate with each other. What's the component that you need to configure to make that happen? And it could be an NSG, could be VNet peering, could be a VPN gateway, whatsoever. So they're going to make it a lot more practical. And again, that's why if you think back, like what I mentioned about an hour ago, brain dumps are not going to help you. Because the brain dump is not telling you how to deploy something in Azure. Like real practical hands-on. Other topics in automation is Visual Studio Code. So it might be that they give you a JSON snippet and you need to add some stuff and deploying it to make sure that you get like a network, virtual machine, I don't know. Management, again, using the portal. How can you deploy the exact same thing, making sure that you can redeploy the same resource group, the same resources, again, in the different ways, portal, PowerShell, using CLI, so spice up your knowledge there a little bit. The DSC part we already talked about. So moving on with networking. Networking is, again, easy and hard because networking is a lot of stuff. Networking in the 100 is what I like to call the basics of networking. So everything that's subnets, VNets, DNS, and NSGs, network security groups. No VPNs, no express route. That comes back in the 101. So they somehow split up your knowledge level that you need to have for that exam. So the VNet peering is an important one. Everything else that's like VNets, understanding the difference between a VNet and a subnet. Why would you use multiple subnets in a single VNet? Why would you use multiple VNets? What's the network communication capability between a single VNet and multiple VNets? DNS obviously is an important one because a lot of the capabilities in the Azure platform rely on Azure DNS, but also understanding it from a hybrid perspective. How do you make sure that when you deploy a domain controller virtual machine in Azure, that it can still communicate with your on-prem environment? And then probably Azure DNS is not going to help you, so you configure like the custom DNS settings pointing to your own DNS server. Or any list of virtual machines where, I don't know, you need to define which virtual machine would get like a fixed IP instead of a dynamic IP. Where most services are okay with a dynamic one, besides if it's like the domain controller DNS server for that VNet, then it would be a fixed IP. Public ones, DNS, I covered. Network security groups are obviously another important one. So know how to deploy them, what they do, what are the limitations, what are the capabilities, how to enable incoming, outgoing traffic, how to lock it down like the typical firewalling capability. And that brings me to the last topic for the last 5 minutes, Azure Identity. 3 main objectives again, overall Azure Active Directory. How to manage it, how to deploy users, how to create groups. AD Connect integration, the hybrid scenario, where you need to know why and how you deploy it. How do you build single sign-on using ADFS integration, for example? Where do you enable password reset options, those things. Managing AD objects like that would probably rely on PowerShell. Like how do you create 500 new users? How do you update the location of 200 users in a branch office and you need to reflect that in Azure AD, something like that. And then the hybrid one, ADFS is an important one, AD Connect is an important one. No third-party tool integration there, so it's always specifically around like the Microsoft toolset. So I assume you all know what Azure AD does, how to use it, why using it. A little angle in like device management, obviously because it's a core component. So you don't need to be an expert on like autopilot, you don't need to know anything about SCCM, the configuration manager, for example, but just knowing that Azure AD supports like adding Windows 10 clients into that and so on. And again, how to do that, how to validate like running some command line tools or using PowerShell or some other integration. Conditional access is another easy one, but could be a very hard one. Know that it's there, and I'm pretty sure that you all know that it's there. Understand the capabilities, limitations, dependencies. Understand the different scenarios. Like if you want to log down, that anyone can log on from an Android device to my backend, integrating with Office 365, for example, where, again, for this exam, you don't need to be the Office 365 expert, but at least know that there's some overlap between conditional access in Azure AD and the one that you got it out of the Office 365. Managing users, groups, covered. The hybrid scenarios already covered, so, or it's cloud only, the hybrid one with password sync for the ones who like it. Understanding federation, why would you use it, how do you deploy it, what are the dependencies for having federation, or the latest one, the pass-through authentication. Then some screenshots, but I'm going to skip those. So go through, if you're like preparing yourself, build a virtual machine, can be run in your Azure trial subscription whatsoever. Think of it as being your on-prem domain controller, install AD Connect, go through the full configuration, not just a next finish, but a bit more complicated. Test password resets, test MFA activation. Make sure that you understand the full spectrum. Where again, one of the questions could be, like these are the 7 steps on how you configure MFA and drag them in the correct order. Where if you've never done it, then it's pretty hard to know in what specific order you have to do that. So for the last few minutes, some, I would say, tips and tricks. Where to find information. We already talked about Docs. I think it's a pretty valid resource. The new one, the Microsoft Learn, so the online 80 hours of content. Obviously, everything around like a Microsoft Learning partner, a training center if you want, is valid. Other online learning resources. Microsoft has a partnership with a lot of them. LinkedIn Learning, obviously. Pluralsight is another one, depending a bit on your organization. If you have an Azure subscription, like an enterprise agreement, you get a lot of Azure Learning from Pluralsight for free for, I think, like 3 months or something. I don't know. Another resource that is interesting to follow is the aka.ms/mscert, or you go to the microsoft.com/learning. That's like your landing page for all certification information. So all slides, technically, without all the screenshots, but like the core objectives are also available on the microsoft.com/learning website. Because what might happen, and that's the little downside of cloud, is that in 3 months from now, the objectives might have changed. Because cloud, it's a moving target, so the objectives probably will change, which was another reason why certification need to be updated. So if you go like, okay, I watched this, or I attended this session here at Ignite, but I'm not going to take any exam like before New Year, then the first thing you do is go to the Microsoft.com website and go to the objective domains again, because they might have changed a little bit. Here at Ignite specifically, you can take a practice test for free. So if you go like, yeah, this was an easy session, I understand everything, all the sample questions that Peter shared, I could answer them easily, then you can just go out and take the exam. It's a 50% discount throughout the Ignite week, or start with the free practice test. And again, it's free throughout the Ignite week here on site. Then my last one, my personal final tips and tricks. It's a 30, 60, 90, and 1 and 2. So what does it mean? You start with your 30, 60, 90-day plan. That means any one of you, without any experience or having a lot of experience, my view, and it's just based on all the trainings that I've been doing and feedback from users, is that if you start today and you count 90 days, so easy said, by the end of mid-January if you want, you can all take and pass the exam. You start in the first 30 days by learning. 1 hour a day, that's the number one. 1 hour a day. During your lunch hour, you watch an Ignite session, that's learning. You read a section out of the docs.microsoft.com. You watch a Pluralsight video, whatever. 1 hour a day. It's not having a lot of impact on your social life, your family life. It's just an hour. When your partner is watching some stupid series on TV, you open up your laptop and you start reading. You watch an Ignite session whatsoever. That's learning. You log onto your Azure portal and you deploy an ARM template. That's that 1 hour. During the next 60 days, or like the next 30 days, you focus on the stuff that you don't know well. If you're like a sysadmin today, you manage VMware, you manage Hyper-V, you deploy virtual machines, you already use PowerShell DSC, all that stuff, skip it. PowerShell DSC is no different if you run it against an Azure VM than you run it against your on-prem VM. So don't focus on, I need to master PowerShell. Just go with the stuff that you already know. And then in the next 30 days, specifically focus on everything that is still not working. Like, maybe you never used CLI. Move that a bit towards the end. Or maybe you can start CLI in the first 30 days. And then depending a bit on how you look at it, like, if it's really hard in the beginning, yeah, then you go like, you know what, this Azure exam, forget about it. I'm not going to do it anymore because it's too hard. So it's also a little bit about like, how do you look at it? And then the last number 2, is 2 exams, the 100, the 101. And the other angle with number 2 is, it's okay to fail. If you take the exam and you fail, you learned a lot. You learned like half of the exam is probably coming back the next time you run it. Probably not the exact same questions, but like overall buckets are pretty similar. But that depends a bit on like time frame. In a lot of scenarios, and I actually don't know like what's the view on it today, but in a lot of scenarios, Microsoft gives you like what's called a second shot. So when you register for your exam, again, I don't know if it's actually live today, but like before July, it actually was for like 2-3 months. When you registered for the exam, you just flag, I want to use a second shot. If you pass the exam from the first time, congrats, you lose your second shot, but you don't need it. But you cannot also transfer it to another exam. So it's like, just activate it. Like, yeah, just give it. If you need it, okay, fine. And again, don't feel bad about failing an exam. I failed Azure exams a lot, mainly the developer ones, because at that time I was not using the platform services. And it's bad, it's sad, because you need to explain to your boss, your family, well, not my boss in my case, because I run my own business, but I need to explain to my wife why I'm studying that hard and still failing the exam. That's the trickiest part, right, about failing the exam. Or if it's like for your own organization, it might cost money, because exams are not free. Then your manager starts complaining about, yeah, why should we spend $500 on exam? Like, you need to try 4 or 5 times. Where honestly, I think if you need to try it like more than 3 times, something's wrong in your study method. 2 attempts is fine, 3 is maybe still okay, but more than 3, then you're studying wrong or you're using the wrong source information, I don't know. Sounds good? I'm like 5 minutes over time, sorry for that, but I wanted to share this one. If you got any other questions, I'm going to make space for the next speaker. I'll be down at the certification area the whole afternoon till like 5:30 this evening. So feel free to pass by. I got some swag, some stickers as well if you want, but maybe pass by there and then you can find some other cool swag that we have. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of Ignite.